The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins. Dramatised for radio in 6 parts by Brian Gear, with music composed by Sidney Sager. The Moonstone. Part 6.
I sat facing Ezra Jennings in the bare little room. On the table between us lay Mr. Jennings' notes, pieced together through the long nights of Mr. Candy's delirium, and hovering in the air, the suggestion that I should put myself back, as nearly as might be, into the frame of mind I found myself in a year ago, and then take another dose of opium to see if it would induce me to steal the diamond a second time.
May I assume that you agree to this attempt at reconstruction?
Is it necessary? Here is the evidence in front of us.
My notes are not evidence. They were taken under circumstances entirely out of the layman's experience, and there is only my word for it that they're genuine, and not some invention of my own. And even if you accept those 2 points, what do they amount to? A theoretical possibility and nothing more.
Then we must try the experiment.
It's the only way.
Pass me your ashtray, Mr. Jennings. This is the last cigar I shall smoke until we have put this idea to the test.
Be quite clear in your mind about what I am suggesting. It may expose you to ridicule, even from your closest friends.
I don't care what it involves. I will try anything to clear my name. But if I'm to do what you suggest, if I'm to steal the diamond unconsciously a second time, it must be in the presence of unimpeachable witnesses.
But of course. Now there's another point. I want you to go into this expecting a reasonable success, not failure. This isn't just some eccentric idea of my own with no scientific foundation. I'm acting on sound physiological principles. Would you like me to turn up the relevant passages in the textbook?
No, thank you. But I'd be grateful if you'd explain one thing. How could I have walked into Rachel's sitting room, opened the cabinet, taken the diamond, and gone back to my own room again? I thought the effect of opium was first to stupefy you, and then to send you to sleep.
A common error about opium, Mr. Blake. Would you have supposed that I am, at this moment, under the influence of a dose 10 times larger than the one Mr. Candy gave to you?
Why, no, Mr. Jennings, I should not.
There's no need to look so alarmed. I take it strictly for medical reasons. From necessity, I might say. Besides, as to the point you have just made about the effect of opium, De Quincey, in his Confessions of an English Opium Eater, tells us that after what he calls a debauch of opium, he either went to the opera to enjoy the music, or he wandered about the London markets on Saturday nights.
But there is no doubt that I had a perfect night's sleep after Mr. Candy gave me the opium.
When you take opium, 2 things happen. First, you are stimulated. Then you are sedated. Now, going back to the night in question. In the stimulating phase, the latest and most vivid impression left on your mind, the anxiety about the diamond,
yes,
would be likely to become intensified in your brain. Little by little, this anxiety would drive you to take whatever steps you could to make sure the diamond was safe. In the spiritualized intoxication of opium, you would go into the room, find the cabinet, open it, take the diamond out, and retrace your steps.
But if I could do all that, how could I not remember it the next morning?
Because later, as the sedative effect began to gain on the stimulant action, you would slowly become inert and stupefied, and later still, you would fall into a deep sleep. With the morning, when the effect of the opium had been slept off, you would wake up completely ignorant of what you had done during the night.
Very well, then. What did I do next? What did I do with the diamond once I'd taken it?
That's the very point I was coming to. When you left Miss Veranda's sitting room with the diamond in your hand, I should think it very likely you went back to your own room.
Yes, and what then?
It's possible that with the idea of preserving the diamond uppermost in your mind, you hid it somewhere in your bedroom.
Oh, just a minute, Mr. Jennings. That can't possibly be the case. The diamond is in London now.
In London? How did it get there?
Nobody knows.
But you say you took it out of Miss Veranda's room. So how was it taken out of your keeping?
I have no idea.
But where was it when you woke up in the morning? Did you see it?
No.
Has Miss Veranda got it back?
No, or I would not be here now.
Mr. Blake, there seems to be something here that needs clearing up. But for the present, let's return to the experiment with the opium. We have decided that you leave off the habit of smoking.
From this moment?
Good. Not many men could make that resolve, I can assure you. Now, the next step is to reproduce, as nearly as we can, your domestic circumstances as they were last year.
But how can we? The house is all closed. My aunt is dead. Godfrey Ablewhite is on the continent. And so long as the suspicion of the theft rests on me, it is quite out of the question for me to meet Miss Verinder.
Oh, I don't think reassembling the same people is very important. But I do think you should see the same objects, pieces of furniture and so on. Above all, you must sleep in the same room, and it must be furnished the same way. So must Miss Verinder's sitting room.
But you're forgetting something else. It is Miss Verinder's house now, and as things are between us, I cannot even write to her.
I see. Mr. Blake, may I ask you a delicate question?
Yes.
Am I right in thinking you felt no common interest in Miss Verinder this time last year?
And I still do.
And Miss Verinder returned that feeling?
She did.
So it would not be unreasonable to assume that she would like to see you proved innocent.
Well, there's no doubt of that.
Then, with your permission, I will write to her and ask leave to use her house for the experiment.
Mr. Jennings, if you would do that, I believe you would be doing me the greatest possible favour.
Then that's settled. I shall write by today's post. Now, don't forget to lock up your cigars when you get back to the hotel.
Yes.
I'll call tomorrow and hear how you have passed the night.
It was then the 15th of June. The events of the next few days are all recorded in the journal kept by Ezra Jennings. Let him tell how the venture with the opium was tried and how it ended.
Miss Verinder wrote to say that she believed in Mr. Blake's innocence, simply from reading my theory of the opium. Nevertheless, she willingly gave us her permission to use the house if we still wanted to try the experiment, and she would like to come to Yorkshire herself and be one of the witnesses. I agreed, as long as she promised not to see Mr. Blake beforehand. Meanwhile, Mr. Blake's health was visibly suffering from his giving up smoking. He was sleeping badly and becoming short-tempered, both very good signs. On one of my visits to Mr. Blake at the hotel, I found him in the company of Gabriel Betteridge.
I'm sorry to have to tell you, Mr. Jennings, that it's quite impossible to furnish the inner hall as it was last year.
You're not sorry at all, Betteridge. You're positively glad.
It's a simple matter of fact, Mr. Franklin. Last year there was a stuffed buzzard in the hall, and when the family left, the buzzard was put away with the other things, and when he was put away, he burst.
Very well, Betteridge. We will do without the buzzard. But I should like the carpet to be laid on the stairs as before.
Now that can't be done either. The man who laid that carpet down is dead, and the like of him for reconciling a carpet in a corner is not to be found in all England.
Very well. We must try the next best man in England.
Just as you wish, Mr. Jennings. What else?
Miss Verinder's sitting room to be restored exactly to what it was last year. Also the corridor leading from the sitting room to the first landing. Also the bedroom, occupied last year by Mr. Blake.
When we took up the carpet in Miss Verinder's sitting room, we found a surprising quantity of pins. Am I to put them back down again?
I don't think the pins are material to the experiment.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Now, as to Mr. Franklin's bedroom, who is responsible for keeping it in a permanent state of disorder? His trousers here, his shirts there, and his French novels everywhere, him or me?
Oh, I think you can rely on me for that, Betteridge.
Then if there are no more instructions, I would like to make a start.
No, nothing more, Betteridge.
Very good, sir. Good day to you both, gentlemen.
Do you think we can depend on him, Mr. Blake?
Implicitly. We shall find the house exactly as you want it. Oh, by the way, I've heard from Mr. Bruff, the family lawyer. It will not surprise you to know that he heartily disapproves of the whole thing. But on the other hand, he thinks we ought to have somebody of sound common sense present, and he will therefore act as a witness.
June the 25th, the day of the experiment, and everything at the house was ready. From giving up his cigars, Mr. Blake was fully as irritable as he had been a year before. Mr. Bruff appeared, and was given the room communicating with Mr. Blake's. Miss Verinder arrived during the evening with her guardian, Mrs. Merridew, as chaperone, and went straight to her own rooms. Mr. Blake, Mr. Bruff, and I dined at exactly the hour of the birthday dinner. I led the conversation back to the Moonstone, and seemed to have revived Mr. Blake's anxiety about it before he went upstairs. Because of Miss Verinder's interest, I had Betteridge bring the medicine chest to her sitting room.
May I help you, Mr. Jennings? Is there anything I can do?
You can pour on the water when I've measured out the drop.
Is this likely to take long? I brought some papers with me to work on.
Just witness the measuring out of the laudanum, Mr. Bruff, and we shall not want you again until it begins to take its effect on Mr. Blake.
By the way, Mr. Jennings, Mrs. Merridew has retired to bed. She seemed to be under the apprehension that your experiment involved an explosion. I told her it would not take place until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I hope I did it right, sir.
You did splendidly, Betteridge.
How much laudanum are you going to give him?
I've decided to increase the dose.
Oh, is that safe?
Quite safe, Miss Verinder. You see, my notes tell me that Mr. Candy gave him only 25 minims. Now, that's a small amount to produce the results we know it did. Not only that, Mr. Blake knows this time he is to take the laudanum, and that's likely to make him rather resistant to its effects. There we are. 40 drops. I think that will do nicely.
Oh, let me pour out the water. I must do something.
Very well. Just half full.
How long before anything happens?
An hour, perhaps. Now, this room must be dark, as it was before. And I have here a piece of crystal, which is to be the substitute for the diamond.
Oh, let me put it in the cabinet.
Can you remember the right drawer?
Of course. This one.
Did you witness that, Mr. Bruff?
I did, Mr. Jennings, and I say before everyone that I am astonished that you, a physician, should countenance such a charade as we're all taking part in tonight.
Oh, come, Mr. Bruff. Surely any attempt to clear up this affair is worth trying. It would so ease my own heart if it succeeds.
It is only that consideration, Rachel, that has persuaded me to be present.
Now, Miss Verinder, you must wait in your bedroom just as you did before. Are you sure you can control yourself? He must not suspect your presence.
Oh, for his sake, I can do anything. Besides, so far as I am concerned, he is proved innocent already.
The thought does you credit, Miss Verinder. But remember that we also have hopes that the experiment may show us what happened to the diamond after Mr. Blake took it.
Of course. I shall leave my door just a little open as it was that night.
Good. Now, gentlemen, I would like you both to come with me to Mr. Blake's room. It's time to give him the laudanum.
Really, Mr. Jennings, this suspense is intolerable. Am I to have the opium tonight or not?
You ought to have it now, Mr. Blake. Here it is.
And give it to me at once before I change my mind about the whole affair.
You'll do no such thing. My time's valuable, even if yours is not.
Oh, don't grumble, Mr. Bruff. Here, give me the glass. There you are, Mr. Jennings. Now, are you satisfied, Mr. Bruff? You've seen me take the laudanum?
I've seen it. Now may I do some work on my papers?
Oh, you have no more imagination than a cow, Mr. Bruff.
A cow is a very useful animal.
And what are we to do now, Mr. Jennings?
Be so kind as to draw the curtains round the bed, Betteridge.
Very good, sir.
They were not closed on this side, Betteridge.
Then leave those. We will wait in the other part of the room.
Mr. Jennings, I own I'm not a little apprehensive.
The dose I have given you cannot possibly do you any harm.
No, it's not that. I mean, I'm afraid it may not work, that nothing at all will happen.
Put your mind at rest on that point. It will all happen as it did before. Of that I am convinced.
Very well. And thank you, Mr. Jennings.
Now, let me try and compose myself for sleep.
For the Lord's sake, sir, tell us when it will begin to work.
Not before midnight. Say nothing and sit still. No, there's one thing we must all do. Take off our boots.
What, sir? Take off my boots? Whatever next?
It's absolutely essential. If Mr. Blake leaves his bed, we must follow him. And we must do so without noise. Now, please be so good as to do as I ask. You too, Betteridge.
Having so far forgotten ourselves, why stop at taking off our boots?
I hope no word of this ever gets back to my office.
How long, Mr. Jennings, before I fall asleep?
Did it not occur to you, Mr. Blake, that when you brought the Moonstone here from the bank at Frizinghall, you were running a great risk?
What? Oh, why? No, not then. It seems greater now, when I look back on it in the light of subsequent events.
But this time last year, as you lay in this bed, were you not anxious for Miss Verinder's personal safety?
Of course I was. I know Murthwaite said that the Indians wouldn't try to take the diamond a second time that night, but I didn't know how far his opinion could be relied upon. Yes, I was very anxious. and determined the next morning to make her see the danger she was in.
I encouraged him to talk about the diamond, so as to make him forget about the opium. As the minutes of the new morning wore away, the sublime intoxication of the drug gleamed in his eyes. He ceased to complete his sentences. The sentences dropped to single words. Then silence. He sat up in bed. He began to talk again, but to himself, not to me. The stimulant effect of the opium had taken control of him.
I wish I'd never taken it out of the bank. It was safe in the bank. Oh, how do I know? The Indians may be hidden in the house. It's not even locked up. It's in the drawer of her cabinet. And the drawer doesn't lock. Anybody might take it. No, why should they? This is England, the 19th century. Be sensible and go to sleep. Deal with it in the morning. How the devil am I to sleep with this on my mind? Must make sure it's safe.
He rose, took the candle from beside his bed, and went swiftly out of the room. We followed him along the corridor, down the stairs, along the second corridor. He never looked back. He never hesitated. He went straight into the sitting room, leaving the door open. He advanced to the middle of the room and looked about him. I saw the door of Miss Verander's bedroom standing ajar, and the dim outline of her summer dress. Not a sound, not a movement from her. Mr. Blake put his candle on top of the Indian cabinet and opened one drawer after another until he came to the one with a piece of crystal in it. He took it out with his right hand and picked up his candle with the left. All this was what he had done last year. Would he now repeat what he had done next? He put the candle down on a little table, wandered irresolutely towards the sofa, and collapsed on it in a heap. The crystal fell from his hand. He was asleep. The experiment was over. Come along. We may go into the room now. Nothing will disturb him for some time. The sedative effect of the opium is upon him.
Mr. Jennings, I owe you an apology. I own I thought this whole thing would be a waste of time. But we have seen Franklin Blake take the diamond under the influence of opium, just as he did last year. You have proved your case, and now I'm going to draw up a paper to that effect. Will you sign it with me, Mr. Betteridge?
It will be a pleasure, sir. By jingo, we're beginning to see daylight in all this at last.
Thank you, both of you. But I must point out that the experiment has not been a complete success, and perhaps it has failed where it should have been of most use.
Oh?
In showing us what Mr. Blake did with the diamond after he had taken it from the cabinet.
Why do you think that was, Mr. Jennings?
Perhaps I gave him too large a dose of opium. And then we could not reproduce exactly the conditions of last year. I mean the conditions in Mr. Blake's mind. However, we have proved that even if he did take the diamond, he was not acting consciously when he did so.
One word about the diamond. Your theory, Mr. Jennings, is that he hid it in his room. Mine is that it's in the possession of Mr. Luca's bankers in London.
But can you put your theory to the test?
I'm doing so even at this moment. I know that Mr. Luca must take the diamond out of the bank himself, and if the pledge is being redeemed when it first falls due, then he will be doing so about this time of the month. So I am setting a watch for Mr. Luca at his bankers. If he does redeem the Moonstone, he must lead us to the person who deposited it with him, and we clear the mystery up once and for all.
Then let us hope that your watch is successful.
I'm going back to London with the morning train. If I hear that a discovery has been made, it'll be a good thing to have Mr. Blake in London with me. Will he be fit to travel?
I should think so. He'll have had a good night's sleep.
Good. Now sign this, Betteridge.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Jennings? Thank you. You may rest assured that I shall keep this document in a safe place. Mr. Jennings, I am in your debt. Franklin Blake is more than just a client to me. I've known him since he was a boy. Well, I want my bed. Good night.
Good night, Mr. Bruff.
Mr. Jennings, I would like to make my rounds and be sure that all is locked up for the night. I trust it will be in order if I now resume my boots.
Perfectly in order, Betteridge. Good night, and thank you. I was alone in the room with Mr. Blake. I arranged him in a more comfortable position on the sofa, and as I was doing so, Miss Verinder came out of her bedroom.
Is he quite safe like that, Mr. Jennings?
Quite safe, Miss Verinder. He will sleep deeply for several hours. Besides, I shall stay and watch him. You need have no fear.
Oh, let me watch him with you.
You need your rest, Miss Verinder.
Oh, but I can't sleep, not after this. It's all proved, isn't it? He didn't take the diamond, did he? Well, not as himself, consciously.
No.
I've been so cruel to him. How can I ever make amends?
If I may say so, Miss Verinder, I don't think, from what Mr. Blake has let drop to me, I don't think you will have to make amends.
I'm so happy. He will see me here when he wakes up and everything will be all right again. I'd forgotten what it's like to be happy. Mr. Jennings?
Yes?
How do you come to know so much about opium and what it can do?
It's a very commonly prescribed drug. Any physician would know about it.
But you seem to have a special interest in it.
The nervous system is my particular study.
Mr. Jennings, this may be an impertinence, but you do not look a well man. Do you use opium yourself?
Yes, Miss Verinder, I do. I have a disease which... Let us just say opium gives me some relief.
I'm sorry. I should not have mentioned it.
No. No one could possibly be offended at anything you said, Miss Verinder. Now you will understand if I have to leave you to watch alone later on. The pain is at its worst in the early morning. Perhaps you could fetch a shawl or a coverlet. I don't want him to catch cold.
I woke up without the slightest knowledge of what I'd done under the opium. Of what happened after my waking, I merely report that Rachel and I thoroughly understood each other before a word was spoken. We all returned to London that morning. We wanted Ezra Jennings to come with us, but it was impossible to persuade him to leave Mr. Candy. When we arrived at the terminus, Mr. Bruff was met by a small boy who ran up to him.
Mr. Bruff, sir! Mr. Bruff, come quick!
Why, Gooseberry, whatever is it? What's happened?
Mr. Luke has gone to the bank, sir, with two police officers in plain clothes, sir.
Has he, by Joe? There's not a moment to lose. Cabby! Cabby!
Where to, sir?
Lombard Street. Quick about it.
Right, sir.
In with you, Franklin. Quick. You boy, on the box. Look lively.
Do you think he's going to redeem the Moonstone?
It certainly looks like it, if he's got two plainclothes officers with him. I've had two of my clerks watching Mr. Lucas' house.
Who's that boy? Gooseberry, you called him, didn't you?
Aye, my clerks gave him that name on account of his eyes. But I wish they were as much to be depended upon as he is. That's the sharpest boy in London. I hope we're in time. Might be all over when we get there. Hurry, driver, hurry! Now then, Gooseberry, you stay by me and keep your eyes open.
Yes, sir.
Here's my man. Well, what's the news, Hopkins?
He's in the inner office now, Mr. Bruff. Been there nearly half an hour.
Good man. Well, we'll wait here. You go back to where you are.
Yes, sir.
I see no sign of the Indians, Mr. Bruff. In fact, nothing but perfectly ordinary people going about their business. Excepting that man with a beard and a round hat. Looks like a sailor.
So he couldn't be one of the Indians in disguise?
No. He's taller than any of them.
Well, he must have their spy somewhere, and he may be the man.
Mr. Bruff, here's Mr. Luke and his two plainclothesmen coming out the office.
Keep your eye on him, Gooseberry. If he passes the diamond to anyone, he'll do so here.
I don't think he's seen us.
There. As he passed that man in the grey suit, I saw his hand move.
And I. And now he's out of the door with the two policemen either side of him.
That's my other man slipping out after them. Now then, where's Hopkins? Come to that, where's Gooseberry?
He was here a moment ago.
Oh, wretched boy. What the devil does it mean? They've both left us just at the very time we wanted them most.
Look. The man in the grey suit has just paid in a cheque. Now he's on his way out.
What's to be done? We can't degrade ourselves by following him.
I can. I wouldn't lose sight of that man for £10,000.
In that case, I wouldn't lose sight of you for twice the money.
He's getting onto that omnibus. Come along, Mr. Bruff.
A nice occupation for a man in my position. For heaven's sake, don't mention it. I should be ruined if it was known.
Well, what did you find out?
It's greatly to our credit, Franklin, that you and I are the two worst amateur detectives that ever tried their hands at the trade.
You mean the man in the grey suit knows nothing about the diamond?
He went into that chemist shop. I know the proprietor well. Been going there for years.
And?
I had a few words with him in private. The man in the grey suit has been in his service 30 years, and he would trust him with the crown jewels, let alone the Moonstone. He was simply paying money into his master's account, and that's all.
Now what's to be done?
Come back to my office. Gooseberry and Hopkins have evidently followed somebody else. Let's hope they're better at the game than we are.
I'm very sorry, Mr. Bruff, but I made a mistake. I could have taken my oath I saw Mr. Luca pass something to an elderly gentleman in a light-coloured overcoat. I followed him. It turns out to be a master ironmonger. I'm most respectable.
Oh, dear. And I suppose you've no idea where Gooseberry is?
No, sir. I've seen nothing of him since I left the bank.
Very well, Hopkins. That'll do.
Thank you, sir.
Well, it looks as though we've all made a mess of it.
There's still Woods, my other clerk, the one who followed Mr. Luca.
And the boy.
Yes, I've great faith in young Gooseberry. Perhaps he saw something we didn't. What do you say to dining here on the chance he may come back in an hour or two? There's some good wine in the cellar. We can get it chopped from the coffee house.
Excellent. Though I should like to see Rachel in Portland Square this evening and bring her up to date with events.
Of course. Come in. Woods. Well, what news?
I followed Mr. Luca as per your instructions, sir. He went back to his house and dismissed the two policemen when he got there.
Did you see any sign of the Indians?
No, sir. I looked carefully in the street and in the alley behind the house. There was no one at all loitering nearby.
Thank you, Woods.
Thank you, sir.
Well, there we are.
We must have lost the diamond. Mr. Luca would surely not have dismissed the policeman if he still had it with him.
Exactly my opinion. So Gooseberry's our only hope.
But Gooseberry didn't come back before I went on to see Rachel at her guardian's house. So I left my card at Mr. Bruff's to be given to the boy with a message saying he could find me at my lodgings at 10:30 that night. But I stayed too late with Rachel and found he'd been and gone, leaving me a note to say he'd return next morning.
Come in, Gooseberry, there's a good chap.
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
Sergeant Cuff! Excuse me, I was not addressing you. I was expecting someone else.
That's quite all right, sir. I thought I'd look in on the chance of your being in town before I wrote to Yorkshire.
Well, come in. Would you like some breakfast?
No, thank you, Mr. Blake. 6 o'clock is my breakfast hour these days, and I go to bed with the sun.
The complete country gentleman, eh? Well, you certainly look the part. I would not have recognised you.
The smell and noise of London is fearful, Mr. Blake. I don't know how I endured it all these years.
Pray, take a seat.
Oh, thank you, sir. I only got back from Ireland last night. But before I went to bed, I read your letter, so I know what's happened in the affair of the Moonstone since last year. I'm afraid I completely mistook my case. It's only in books that officers of the detective force don't make a mistake.
But now you're in the nick of time to recover your reputation.
Oh, I beg your pardon, Mr. Blake. But now I have retired from business, I don't care a straw about my reputation. Lady Verinder was very liberal to me in the matter of my fee, and that's why I'm here now. I'll go back to work, if that's what you want. Only on condition that not a farthing is to pass from you to me.
If those are your terms, Sergeant Cuff, then I gratefully accept them.
Just plain Mr. Cuff these days, sir. Now, perhaps you'd tell me how the case stands since your letter.
Well, I told you that Miss Verinder had seen me take the diamond. Well, she was quite right. I did. But I did so under the influence of opium given me sometime the previous night by Mr. Candy.
Good gracious. Can that be proved?
It has already been proved. Mr. Candy's assistant, Mr. Jennings, conducted an experiment. He gave me a second dose of opium, and I repeated my actions of that night, witnessed by Mr. Jennings, Miss Verinder, and Mr. Bruff.
It's quite amazing. In all my experience, I never heard the like. However, did you repeat whatever it was you did with the Moonstone after you took it?
Unfortunately, no. But Mr. Jennings thinks I must have hidden it in my room.
Then how did it get to London? No, that won't do. But I agree with him that you must have taken it back to your room.
Well, and then what happened?
Have you no suspicion yourself?
None whatever. And there's one more thing I must tell you. Mr. Luca took the Moonstone out of the bank yesterday. Oh, come in. Gooseberry, come in, boy.
Good morning, Mr. Blake.
Mr. Cuff, this is Mr. Bruff's office boy and budding detective, Gooseberry.
Not the Mr. Cuff. Sergeant Cuff of the Detective Police.
Formerly of the Detective Police, now retired.
But newly come out of retirement to help us in the affair of the Moonstone. Shut the door, Gooseberry, and tell us your news. Now, Did you follow anyone yesterday at the bank?
Yes, sir. But first I am to tell you that Mr. Bruff presents his compliments and says he's prevented from being with you today. Gout, sir.
Oh, dear, I am sorry. Poor man.
Well, my lad, and what have you got to tell us?
Please, sir, may I tell you in a cab, sir?
And why in a cab, Gooseberry?
Because I think we ought to get over the docks as quick as we can.
And why do you think that?
Because yesterday at the bank I followed a man and that's where he went, sir. It was a tall man, sir, with a big black beard, and he was dressed all like a sailor.
I remember him. Mr. Bruff and I thought he was a spy for the Indians.
And why did you follow him, Gooseberry?
Because I saw Mr. Luca pass something to him.
Why didn't you tell Mr. Bruff or Mr. Blake what you saw?
No, there was no time. He went out in such a hurry.
Well, what did he do when he got into the street?
He called a cab, sir, and I held on behind and ran after it.
And he went to the docks, you say?
Yes, sir, Tar Wharf. Spoke with the steward of a Rotterdam steamboat. He asked if he could go aboard and sleep in his berth overnight. The steward wouldn't let him because of the cabins being clean.
Then what did he do?
He left the wharf and came back into the street. It was then I noticed a man.
What man?
Well, a workman, sir. He seemed to be watching the sailor. And when the sailor went into an eating house, the workman waited on the other side of the road. Then after a minute, a cab came by and stopped by the workman. A man leaned forward at the window. A man with a dark face, all like an Indian, sir. And he spoke to the workman. I couldn't hear what they said. Well, then the cab went on down the street, and the workman went across the road into an eating house.
What did you do?
Oh, well, I waited till I was hungry, and then I went in too. I had a shilling in my pocket, and I had black pudding eel pie and a bottle of ginger beer.
Mr. Blake, what can a small boy not digest? The substance in question has never been found yet.
What happened in the eating house?
Well, the sailor read the newspaper at one table, and the workman read the newspaper at another table. Well, then the sailor got up and went out, so I went out too. He didn't seem too sure of where he was going, but in the end he went into the Wheel of Fortune public house. They do very good pork pies there, sir.
And what of the workman?
Oh, he followed too, on the other side of the road.
And in the Wheel of Fortune, what happened?
Well, the sailor asked if he could have a bed. The landlord said they were full, but the barmaid said no, number 10 was empty, and they sent for a waiter to show the sailor up. Just before that, I'd noticed the workman among the people at the bar. But before the waiter had answered the call, he'd vanished.
Who's vanished? The workman?
Yeah, that's right, sir. Well, the next thing was, the sailor was taken up to see number 10, so I waited to see if anything happened.
And did it?
Oh, yes, sir. There were men shouting upstairs, and the landlord was called for, and then he come downstairs again with the workman by the collar.
So the workman had gone upstairs?
Yes, sir.
But why had the landlord got him by the collar?
Because he was drunk, sir.
Drunk?
Ah, but wait till I get the end of my story, sir. Well, the landlord put him out into the street and said he'd have the police round if he'd come back. You see, sir, the waiter and the sailor had found the workman in room number 10, and the workman kept saying he'd taken it.
But this is extraordinary. The workman wasn't drunk before, was he?
No, sir, and he wasn't drunk afterwards either. Oh, I followed him. He was rolling and staggering about something shocking, sir, until he got round a corner. And then he was sober as you or me, sir.
So, we have the sailor in room number 10 and the workman drunk and then suddenly sober. Anything else?
Only this, sir. I went back to the Wheel of Fortune to see if I could see any more of a sailor, but he must have stayed up in his room. When I left again, there was the workman, standing on the other side of the road, looking up at a window at the top of the public house, the only window with a light in it. Well, then he walked away again, and I come on to your lodgings, Mr. Blake, to tell you what I'd seen. But you didn't come back, even though I waited. So then I went home, because I ain't fit for nothing if I don't get my night's sleep, sir.
What a pity you were not at home, Mr. Blake. We've lost valuable time in this.
But you were not here until this morning, Mr. Cuff.
True, but you might have thought to pursue inquiries yourself. However, let that be.
What do you make of all this?
The sailor is evidently the person to whom Mr. Luca passed the diamond.
But I distinctly saw his hand move as he passed another man.
Bluff, Mr. Blake, to put you on the wrong track.
And the workman who followed the sailor. Spy for the Indians, of course. But how do you explain the sudden drunkenness?
Oh, that's easy enough. He was caught having a look at room number 10 and pretended to be drunk as an excuse.
But why did he want to see the room at all?
To report it all to the Indians. They couldn't risk arousing suspicion by appearing themselves. So they would have told the man he must give them a description of the room where the sailor was lodging for the night. Because that's where the Moonstone would be.
Here we are, Mr. Cuff, the Wheel of Fortune.
The place is in turmoil, Mr. Cuff.
Yes, I fear we may be too late. This will be the landlord.
Now, who the devil are you and what do you want?
I'm Sergeant Cuff, late of the Detective Police, and I'll thank you to keep your temper, landlord.
I'm sorry, sir, but something unpleasant has happened.
Has it anything to do with a man dressed like a sailor who slept here last night?
In room number 10?
Why, yes, it has. He didn't answer his call at 7, or at 8, or 9. That's a carpenter you can hear trying to open his door this very minute.
Is there any other way he could have left his room?
Well, I suppose there is, but you see, this room's a garret, and there's a trapdoor onto the roof. You don't think he's gone that way without paying?
The sailor might have done.
The room's open. Come on up, sir.
Oh.
No! You wait here, boy!
Oh, sir!
We still can't get in. There's something behind the door.
Very well. Stand aside. I'll put my shoulder to it. There he is on the bed, still asleep.
It's the man we saw in the bank.
Hold on. This man's in a fit. Look at his eyes.
He's dead.
What?
This man's dead, landlord. You'd better send for a doctor and the police.
Go on. You heard what the sergeant said. See to it, man.
Yes, sir. Right away.
Mr. Blake, sir. Look at this.
What? You were told to wait downstairs, boy.
Yeah, but look at this box on the table and this receipt.
Here, give it to me. Deposited with Messrs. So-and-so by Mr. Septimus Luca, a small wooden box containing a valuable of great price to be given up only on the personal application of Mr. Luca.
It had the diamond in it, didn't it, sir?
Mr. Blake.
Look, sir, Mr. Cuff's pulled off the man's hair.
May I trouble you to come over to the bed, Mr. Blake?
Oh, he's pulled off the man's beard.
For God's sake, what are you doing?
Making due allowance for the dark complexion, which I have not yet had time to wash off. Who would you say this man was, Mr. Blake?
What? How should I know him?
Perhaps if you could bring yourself to look, Mr. Blake.
My God. It's Godfrey Ablewhite.
Yes, that's what I thought.
But how does Godfrey come to have the Moonstone? Does it mean that he took it after all?
We may find that out with further inquiries.
But why? He had money.
I should say he was suffocated with this pillow. Still, the post-mortem will tell us that.
Look here, sir. There's a piece cut out the trapdoor just behind the bolt. Well, that's how they got in the Murderford gentleman.
Well done, boy. Yes, that's how they got in, all right, landlord.
Yes, sir.
How could anyone have got onto the roof from outside?
Why, there's a house under repair only 3 doors down. Oh, there's scaffolding and ladders.
Then that's how they got up. A flat roof, is it?
Yes, sir. And if you kept bent low, the parapet would hide you from the street. Besides, this is one of the quietest streets in London after midnight.
When the police arrive, landlord, be so good as to tell them I shall put myself at their disposal later. But now there are some inquiries I must pursue. Urgently.
Yes, Mr. Cuff, this is the box I handed to Godfrey Ablewhite, and the Moonstone was in it.
And where is it now?
On its way back to India, where it came from. Mr. Luca, how did you come by the Moonstone?
Godfrey Ablewhite brought it to me, just over a year ago it was. I was more than surprised, I can tell you. No such diamond as that was in the private possession of anyone in Europe, let alone in Great Britain.
And what proposal did Godfrey Ablewhite make to you?
Well, first, that I should buy the stone off him, and if I didn't want to do that, would I sell it on commission and pay him a sum down on account? Well, of course, I wasn't prepared to do either. But my curiosity was aroused, as you can well imagine. I examined the stone, and I came to the conclusion that it was worth £30,000 if it was worth a penny. Then I asked him how he got it.
And what did he say?
He tried to fob me off with a couple of stories, so I showed him the door.
And then?
And then he told me the truth. He had no option if he wanted to raise any money on the stone.
Mr. Franklin Blake and I don't always see eye to eye, and he was in a particularly waspish mood the night of Rachel's birthday. He crossed swords with a doctor on whether or not he needed medicine to make him sleep at nights. The doctor proposed that I should help him give Mr. Blake a little lesson by slipping some laudanum into his brandy and soda last thing. I had the room next to Mr. Blake's. Do you follow me so far?
Perfectly, Mr. Ablewhite. Pray continue.
I wished him good night and went into my own room. I sat thinking for about an hour, and then, just as I was getting into bed, I heard Mr. Blake talking to himself. His voice sounded unnatural, and I looked in to see if he was all right. He was mumbling about the diamond. Was it safe, and he couldn't sleep with it on his mind, that sort of thing.
Go on, Mr. Ablewhite, you interest me.
Well, then he took his candle and went out of the room. I thought the laudanum had had some effect on him which the doctor hadn't foreseen, and I was afraid of an accident, so I followed him. He went to Miss Verender's sitting room, and I saw him take the diamond out of a cabinet. I also saw that Miss Verinder was standing at another door, and I knew that she'd seen it too. Then I hurried back to my room, or else he would have blundered into me as he came by.
And then what happened?
I'd scarcely got back when he came through the communicating door into my room. He seemed to be awake, yet not awake, if you understand me. Well, I was afraid to say anything, but he spoke first. "Put it in your father's bank at Frisinghall," he said. "It'll be safe there." And then he turned and went back into his own room. He gave me the diamond, Mr. Luca. He put it into my hand.
But the next morning, was there not a hue and cry?
Oh, of course. The police are there still. But for reasons of her own, Miss Verinder has said nothing about what she saw. And I, of course, am not suspected.
No. Yeah, but as a man of honour, Mr. Ablewhite, are you not obliged to declare what has happened? That Mr. Blake took this stone apparently under the influence of a drug, and that it's in your possession?
Oh, yes, as a man of honour. But I have my reasons for keeping silent.
Pure greed, perhaps?
How dare you, sir?
How dare you, after what you've just confessed, speak to me like that? Come, your reasons.
I don't see that my reasons are any concern of yours.
If you want me to consider involving myself as an accomplice to your crime, you will tell me your reasons, or you will leave my house.
Very well. I am pressed for money. Desperately pressed.
Debts?
Of course, debts.
What kind of debts?
I'm one of 2 trustees for a young man's fortune. £20,000. I have sold every farthing of it out of the funds.
And why should you do that? Do you not have sufficient income of your own?
Not to maintain a villa in the suburbs, and a certain lady who lives in it, and who is accustomed to a luxurious style of living.
And the other trustee's signature?
Forged.
So, forgive me for being so intrusive. So, what is your present financial position?
I have £300 to find tomorrow for the young man, the half-yearly payment from his capital. And when the trust lapses on his coming of age next February, 20,000. I don't even have the 300. I've tried to borrow from my father, but he won't lend me a penny. That is why I kept the diamond. It's all that stands between me and ruin.
Yes, well, you've been to me before to borrow money.
Under necessity, yes.
And I hold certain promissory notes of yours.
Yes.
Mr. Ablewhite, even in my line of business, this is a doubtful, I might even say a dangerous transaction. You will therefore not expect me to be, well, what shall I say, liberal.
But you yourself have just valued this stone at £30,000. It's a fortune. And you say you can't be liberal?
Here is what I propose. I will lend you the sum of £2,000 on...
£2,000? But that's...
On condition that you deposit the Moonstone with me as a pledge. If after 1 year you pay me £3,000, you may have the Moonstone back. If you do not, then you forfeit the pledge. The Moonstone stays with me. In this unfortunate case, I will make you a present of those promissory notes of yours.
That's monstrous, outrageous. Certainly not.
Very well, here is your diamond. Good night, Mr. Ablewhite.
No, wait. I have no choice. I can't give the young man his £300 tomorrow. If it weren't for that, I should have taken the diamond to Amsterdam and had it cut up. But there's no time. Very well. I accept. But I must have £300 now.
Of course, Mr. Ablewhite. I'm not an unreasonable man. £300 now and the balance of £1,700 in 1 week. Oh, and of course, now that we've entered into this little business agreement, you may rely implicitly upon my silence, Mr. Ablewhite.
Mr. Luca, you amaze me. Godfrey Ablewhite was my cousin. I would no more have suspected him of taking the Moonstone than of
having the villa and the mistress? Perhaps. But it is well within my experience, I can assure you, that these philanthropic gentlemen often have another side to their lives, a side which they would not care to have revealed to their ladies' committees.
And how did he raise the £3,000 to redeem the Moonstone?
One of those committee ladies fortunately died and left him £5,000. It happened a few weeks ago, I believe.
Yes! Just before I went to Yorkshire for the experiment, Mr. Cuff, I tried to get in touch with Godfrey. Someone at his club told me he'd gone to Europe.
Rotterdam, you may be sure to make arrangements to have the diamond cut up into a marketable commodity.
Of course, the Rotterdam steamer. The boy told us he was trying to spend the night aboard it.
And where, I wonder, is that troublesome jewel now?
I think there's little doubt it's well on its way back to where it came from.
Then there's a chance you might recover it yet.
I think not, Mr. Luca. The Indians, from what we know of them, will not take the direct route. They will cover their tracks, pursue them how we may.
And I think I can speak for Rachel when I say that we don't want it back.
Not want a stone like that worth 30,000?
If it were worth 10 times that amount, I would say the same.
Well, I mean,
I believe it was deliberately left to Rachel by her uncle to cause as much trouble and misery as it possibly could. Well, it has done that. Let it come to rest where it belongs. I want no more of it.
Well said, Mr. Blake. I should say the same in your place. But Mr. Luca has, on his own admission, been an accomplice to the theft.
What's that?
There's no denying it now, Mr. Luca. You admitted it in front of 2 witnesses, and you have made a cool £1,000 out of it.
Yeah, but that is my business, gentlemen, only my business.
Mr. Luca, if you would restore that £1,000 to Miss Verinder, to whom surely it belongs, then I think Mr. Blake and I would be prepared to overlook your part in the affair. If not... Well, I shall be returning to the police this afternoon to assist them in their inquiries into Mr. Hablewhite's death.
Very well. Very well. Here, let me write you my cheque.
Godfrey Hablewhite, eh? Well, well. A man doesn't spend a lifetime in my profession without becoming inured to surprise. But I own I'm surprised now. But he does explain 1 or 2 things. His proposal of marriage to Miss Verinder.
And his calm acceptance when she released herself from the engagement.
Couldn't get at the money?
Right, Mr. Cuff. Rachel only has a life interest in her mother's property, and there's no raising 20,000 on that.
Oh, there's something else. When I was trying to find anyone who'd been at Rachel's birthday dinner to try to reconstruct what happened that night, I made inquiries for Godfrey at his club. I happened to meet a mutual acquaintance, and he told me that Godfrey had become engaged to another young lady. Another very rich young lady. And that had foundered because he couldn't come to an agreement with her father over the marriage settlement. I didn't attach any importance to it at the time.
Now, that would have been when he was travelling abroad on his legacy of 5,000.
Yes. You know, it may sound absurd, but I can't help feeling sorry for the fellow.
Wasted sympathy. It was all his own doing.
Yes, but what a position to be in. On the one hand, known in society as a respected philanthropist. On the other, keeping a mistress and having squandered money held in trust by him in order to do so.
And he very nearly got away with it. Yeah. If he'd got to Amsterdam with the Moonstone, there would just have been time to get it cut up into separate stones, to have sold them, and been able to restore the young man's fortune when it was due. He might even have made a small profit.
And as it is, he gave his life for it, for a wretched piece of carbon. It's funny. I remember him calling it that the day I gave it to Rachel, and everyone else was saying how wonderful it was.
And I suppose there's no doubt it was the Indians who murdered him?
No moral doubt, no. Though I don't suppose we'll ever be able to prove it in a court of law.
So what will the inquest verdict be?
Almost certainly willful murder by person or persons unknown.
Well, let's put it all behind us, gentlemen. It's a year of my life I never want to live again. But one good thing has come out of it, and I'd like you both to be the first to know. Rachel and I are going to be married.
Ah, congratulations. Mr. Blake, I wonder if I might ask you a small favour.
My dear Mr. Cuff, anything.
As you know, in my retirement, I've been able to give more of my time to growing roses, and I'm rather proud of having produced a new variety. It would give me considerable pleasure, Mr. Blake, if I could have your permission to call it Rachel Verinder. A pretty name, and a pretty name for a rose, too.
Darling.
With all my heart. And Rachel will be delighted. I know she will. And so I come to the end of the story, or almost the end. One thing more remains to tell. Rachel and I had been married for about 3 months when I received a letter from abroad, much crumpled from its travels. It was from Mr. Murthwaite, the Indian explorer.
About a fortnight since, I found myself in a province of northwestern India called Kathiawar, where the people are fanatically devoted to the old Hindu religion. I resolved not to leave these romantic regions without looking once more upon the magnificent desolation of Somnauth. I had not been long upon the road before I noticed that other people, by twos and threes, appeared to be travelling in the same direction. On the second day the number had increased to hundreds, and on the third to thousands. I learnt that there was to be a great religious ceremony in honour of the god of the moon. The shrine was on a hilltop, and looking back I could see tens of thousands of people dressed in white and carrying torches. In front of the shrine stood 3 men. My companion told me they were Brahmins who had forfeited their caste in the service of the god. They were to purify themselves by pilgrimage, to set forth in 3 separate directions, never to look on each other's faces again, never to rest on their wanderings until the day of their death. They descended from the shrine and took their ways, the crowd parting for them and closing in again, obliterating the paths they had made. Then the curtain in front of the shrine was drawn aside, and the figure of the god was seen, his 4 arms stretching out to the 4 corners of the earth. And in his forehead shone the yellow diamond I had last seen on a woman's dress in England. How it came back to its rightful place I do not know. But I do know that after 8 centuries, the Moonstone looks out once more over the sacred city in which its story began. What will be the next adventure in the life of that accursed jewel? Who can tell?
That was the final part of The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, dramatised for radio by Brian Gear. The cast: Sergeant Cuff, John Franklin Robbins, Gabriel Betteridge, John Sharp, Franklin Blake, John Telfer, Rachel Verinder, Sally Baxter, Godfrey Ablewhite, Geoffrey Beavers, Mr. Bruff, Nat Brenner, Ezra Jennings, Philip Sully, Septimus Luca, Adrian Egan, Mr. Mirthwaite, Gordon DeLew, Gooseberry, Debbie Cumming, Hopkins, Barclay Johnson, and Woods, Emlyn Harris. The music was composed and conducted by Sidney Sager, and the programme, which came from Bristol, was directed by Brian Miller.